In the heart of Brooksville, under a fiery red maple, an old stranger and his fierce dog become the center of a storm no one saw coming. When suspicion turns the whole town against them, one split-second decision will ignite a chain of events that will challenge everything they thought they knew about loyalty, sacrifice, and redemption. What secret is hidden beneath the dog's battered collar? Who is the mysterious soldier everyone tried to forget? Stay with us, because what happens next will shock the entire community, and the ending is something you'll never see coming. Maple Grove Park, Brooksville, Vermont. The autumn air in Brooksville was thin and clear, crisp, with a promise of frost to come, and the city itself seemed caught in an endless golden hour. Streets were lined with ancient maple trees, whose leaves had turned the park into a sea of amber scarlet and fire-bright orange. It was the sort of late afternoon that made the light itself feel heavy, as though the world was holding its breath between the ache of summer's end and the hush of winter's approach. There, beneath the oldest maple in the park, a great giant with gnarled roots and a crown that spilled red leaves in wide, drifting circles, sat a man who had quietly become a fixture of the landscape, even as few truly saw him. Earl Johnson was not tall, but he carried himself with a posture both upright and weary shoulders, rounded by the long weight of years. His skin was deep brown, his beard a soft silver, peppered with dark streaks, and his hands, large and broad-palmed, spoke of decades spent at work, of holding tools, and perhaps holding on to hope. His eyes, when they opened from under the brim of his faded navy cap, were a warm, deep brown too, but ringed by the lines of old sorrow and the kind of patience one learns only through having been misunderstood. He wore an olive-green army jacket that had seen better days and better wars, its elbows patched by hand, the buttons replaced over time with mismatched brass and plastic tokens of a life patched together piece by piece. Earl was 73, a retired Army sergeant and a man who had seen the world's chaos and returned not quite whole, but not quite broken either. Most days Earl's world was small, just the patch of grass and the wide embrace of the old maple, a place he'd claimed as his own, in quiet defiance of the townsfolk who eyed him with a mix of suspicion and pity. He came here every afternoon, as regular as the chiming of the church bell in the town square, to sit on the old bench beneath the tree and let his thoughts wander with the falling leaves. He seldom spoke unless spoken to, though his voice when it emerged was gentle and deep-colored by a subtle southern lilt and a kind of steady humor that only surfaced if one listened closely. Some whispered that he was a war hero. Others, less generous, called him that old man in the park. Most, however, simply passed him by, never quite meeting his gaze. Curled beside Earl's sturdy boots lay a dog of striking appearance, Hunter, a German shepherd, large and powerfully built, even in old age, with fur that ran in dusky tones from smoke gray to faded tan along his sturdy flanks. Hunter's ears were upright and alert, his tail thick and expressive, sometimes thumping softly against the grass as if echoing a secret joy. The dog's eyes were golden brown, intelligent, but always wary, marked by the same shadows that haunted Earl's own. A faint white scar ran along Hunter's left shoulder, a relic of days when courage was demanded rather than chosen. Hunter was 8 years old, once a K-9 unit in service, but now without a family, since the passing of his handler 6 months ago. Since then he had drifted through the town like a ghost, avoiding children's sticky hands, and the sharp whistles of strangers, never quite trusting anyone, until Earl began sharing his bench, his lunch, and eventually the quiet rhythm of his days. The bond between Earl and Hunter had not been forged by words but in silence. Earl, recognizing the wounded pride in the dog's bearing, had offered a crust of bread and the slow patience that only those who have lived long with pain can afford. Hunter, in turn, had accepted Earl's presence as one accepts the turning of the seasons cautiously, then completely. Now, on most afternoons, they were together, a solitary figure and a silent sentinel beneath the tree, whose roots ran as deep as the memories they both carried. The people of Brooksville watched them from a distance. Some, a cluster of older women on their daily walks, would pause just long enough to remark, not always kindly, about the strange old man with the big dog. Marjorie Bennett, for instance, a petite widow with sharp blue eyes and a habit of clutching her purse tightly against her chest, rarely missed a day without glancing Earl's way. She had lived in Brooksville all her life, her silver hair always neat, her lips always pursed, and her judgments always swift. Marjorie believed in the order of things and keeping to one's own, and the presence of Earl, and especially Hunter, troubled her sense of what was proper. She had more than once called the park maintenance about loose animals and suspicious activity, though nothing ever came of it but wary glances and gossip exchanged over coffee at Sam's Corner Cafe. Sam Wilson, by contrast, was the sort of man who seemed to carry warmth like a lantern in a storm. Owner of the town's only cafe, Sam was in his early 50s, tall, with a barrel chest and arms thick from years of lifting crates and cleaning tables. His skin was ruddy, his hair a wild tumble of brown streaked with gray, and his smile was the sort that made people believe their secrets were safe with him. He'd served in the Navy decades before, and knew without needing to ask the look of a man trying to find his place after war. Sam greeted Earl with a nod whenever he passed, sometimes dropping off a free coffeehouse special, strong as my mother-in-law's opinions and never asking for thanks. On this particular afternoon, the sky was cloudless, the light filtering through the crimson and gold canopy above, dappling the grass and painting Earl and Hunter in hues of memory and fading sun. The town was quieter than usual. Most children had gone home, the air holding only the distant sound of church bells and the gentle rush of wind through the leaves. Hunter shifted, ears twitching at every footfall, his gaze following a pair of joggers as they curved along the path, before dismissing them with a slow blink. Earl, meanwhile, watched the leaves spiral to the ground, his mind wandering between the distant past and the simple comfort of the present. Occasionally a child might approach only to be called back by a watchful parent. Once a boy with a mop of sandy hair and jeans that dragged along the grass, a child named Ben, known for his insatiable curiosity, stopped a few yards away to marvel at Hunter. Ben, about 7, with freckles splashed across his nose and a backpack bouncing against his small frame, stared wide-eyed at the dog. "He's huge, Mom," he exclaimed, but his mother, a harried woman in her 30s with quick steps and a sharp tone, hurried him along, casting a nervous glance at Earl. For a brief moment, Earl met the boy's gaze and offered a small, tired smile. Ben grinned back before being swept away by his mother's urgent hand. The park itself held its breath as the sun slipped lower. For all its beauty, there was an undercurrent of unease, a sense that the world beyond the maple's shadow regarded Earl and Hunter with suspicion. Whispered rumors twisted through the town, like the wind stories about the stranger with the war dog, about why he sat alone, about what secrets he might carry. But if Earl heard the whispers, he gave no sign. If Hunter sensed the tension, he merely pressed closer to Earl's leg, drawing warmth and comfort from his companion. As twilight crept in and the last golden rays caught on the edges of the maple leaves, Earl gathered his coat tighter, feeling the chill that always came with the falling sun. Hunter stood stretching his long legs and shaking his coat, sending a few leaves flying. Together they walked out from under the maple's shadow, the dog moving in perfect rhythm, with the man, their silhouettes drawn long across the grass. In the hush of the evening, they became just another part of the storybook, Autumn 2. Souls scarred but steadfast, searching for a place where suspicion would give way to belonging, and where the simple act of watching the leaves fall could feel for a moment like home. In the heart of Brooksville's fading autumn, the park changed with the sun's arc. By late afternoon, Maple Grove filled with a kind of golden light that seemed to hush every sound, save for the laughter of children in the distance, or the murmur of wind slipping between the trees. Today, however, there was a new note in the air, one that floated above the crunch of leaves and reached even the furthest shadows under the ancient maple. The note belonged to Lucy Miller. At 17, Lucy was the type of girl who wore her curiosity openly, her blue-gray eyes always searching her stride, quick and assured, even when the world felt uncertain. She was of average height, with an elegant frame, honed by years of ballet lessons. She'd given up her light brown hair pulled into a loose ponytail that bounced with every step. Her face was open and expressive, her nose a little freckled from long afternoons outdoors, and her hands were quick, slender, and deft, a musician's hands. Lucy's nature was kind but fierce. She was the sort of person who believed, perhaps too stubbornly, that things could always be better, and who never quite gave up on anyone. Those ideals sometimes clashed with the legacy of her family, especially with her father, Sheriff Travis Miller, a tall, square-jawed man of 50, with weathered skin, a stern countenance, and a military bearing that never seemed to relax. Travis's sense of justice was strict, shaped by a career in law enforcement and a deep loyalty to tradition. He loved Lucy fiercely, but worried for her in a world he saw as full of dangers and disappointments, which only made their relationship more complicated. It was Lucy's habit to visit Maple Grove most afternoons, violin case swinging at her side, as she crossed the crisp grass to the same quiet spot near the old gazebo not far from where Earl Johnson and Hunter kept their silent company beneath the maple's branches. Lucy's violin was a gift from her late grandmother, a beautiful old instrument, the varnish cracked and darkened by time, but its tone rich and mellow, full of ghosts. Lucy's mother, Grace, had passed away when she was just 10, leaving behind a deep gentleness and a stack of sheet music that Lucy carried with her everywhere. It was the gentle void, as much as anything else, that shaped Lucy's heart, a yearning to fill the empty spaces left by loss with music. On this particular afternoon, Lucy arrived just as the sunlight painted the benches in bands of red and gold. She wore a soft blue sweater, faded jeans, and a pair of well-worn sneakers. She set her violin case on the bench, glanced at the solitary figure and the dog beneath the great tree, and gave a small, hesitant wave. Earl, as usual, responded with a slight nod, his gaze warm but reserved. Hunter watched Lucy with the cautious curiosity that marked most of his interactions with strangers, his tail thumping softly but never leaving Earl's side. Lucy tuned her violin, drawing the bow across the strings, until the instrument hummed to life, the sound bright and hopeful. As she played, the melody threaded through the park, pulling at memories and hearts alike. Her fingers danced across the strings, her body swaying with the rise and fall of each phrase. The music was not just an expression for Lucy. It was a language, one she hoped someone else might someday understand. Earl listened still, as a statue, his eyes closed, while Hunter's ears perked, and he turned his head, drawn by the strange, familiar magic of music. At first, Lucy kept her distance, watching Earl and Hunter from across the lawn. There was something in the way they sat together, so silent, yet so bound, that piqued her curiosity, and made her wonder about the stories buried under all that quiet. After her song faded, she packed up, smiled politely, and left. But the next day she returned, and the next, her shyness melting away with each new melody. Hunter became increasingly interested in the music. On the fourth afternoon, as Lucy played a gentle waltz, her mother used to love. Hunter rose, stretched, and walked over with careful, measured steps. Lucy stopped playing the bow, trembling just above the strings, her heart skipping. She watched as the dog approached, tall and imposing, yet oddly dignified, his deep brown eyes fixed not on her, but on the violin. Earl stood too, his hand gentle on Hunter's collar. "He likes music," Earl said in a voice that sounded like gravel softened by rain. It was the first time Lucy had heard him speak, and she was surprised at the gentleness behind his words. Lucy smiled, a little shy, a little bold. "He's beautiful." "What's his name?" Hunter Earl replied, kneeling to rest a hand on the dog's head. Hunter looked up at Lucy, tail sweeping slowly over the fallen leaves. Lucy knelt too, letting Hunter sniff her hand, her nervousness giving way to a kind of fragile trust. "Do you mind if I play, Lucy?" asked. Earl shook his head, a rare smile touching the corners of his mouth. "Play all you like, miss." From then on, a new rhythm settled over the park. Each afternoon, Lucy played. Earl and Hunter listened. Sometimes other park-goers would pause, a young couple hand in hand, or Mrs. Gallagher, a retired schoolteacher with round glasses and a fondness for gossip, her hair piled into a soft bun, always pausing to remark how lovely the music is dear. Mrs. Gallagher, small and spry, despite her age, had been a fixture of the community for decades, known for her sharp wit and gentle heart, shaped by years as a single mother after her husband's early passing. On the edge of the park, Sam Wilson sometimes wandered over from his cafe with a thermos of hot chocolate, handing out steaming cups to Lucy Earl, or any child that happened to wander close. "Music's good for the soul," he'd say, his eyes crinkling in a smile, and Lucy would grin, cheeks pink from the chill. As the days passed, Lucy's confidence grew, and her connection to Earl and Hunter deepened. She began to ask gentle questions. "Did you always like music, Mr. Johnson?" Or, "Was Hunter always so calm?" Earl answered slowly sometimes, with a short story, sometimes with a look that said more than words. He told her about growing up in Georgia, about the war and the silence that came after, about how some wounds never quite healed, but music made them easier to bear. Hunter, for his part, would rest his head on Lucy's knee as she played, letting out contented sighs. More than once, Lucy caught herself smiling at Earl, and Hunter feeling for the first time in years that she was part of something bigger than her grief. One Friday evening, Sheriff Travis Miller came to the park to fetch Lucy. Tall in his uniform, with steel-gray hair and eyes that rarely softened, Travis was an imposing figure. He greeted Earl with a polite nod, careful, distant, and eyed Hunter with suspicion. "Everything all right here?" he'd ask, his voice low. Lucy would reassure him, sometimes gently, sometimes with a teenager's impatience. Travis worried for his daughter, for the world she was growing into, for the man and dog he could not quite understand. But as Lucy hugged her violin case and smiled, Travis's features softened just a little, and he would nod almost to himself before leading Lucy home. The bond between Lucy Earle and Hunter continued to grow, the music in the park becoming a ritual that others quietly welcomed. Where once the whispers were of suspicion, now there was a kind of cautious hope. Even Marjorie Bennett paused one day to listen, her lips pursed, her eyes softening just a touch. In the golden light beneath the maple trees, 3 lonely hearts, one young, one old, and one loyal, began to find comfort and connection in the shared language of music and gentle company, the first chords of a friendship that would shape everything to come. The first true chill of November swept through Brooksville, sharpening the edges of the air and carrying the scent of wood smoke from nearby houses. Maple Grove Park, once a blaze of autumn color, had started to shed its leaves in earnest. The ground beneath the great maple was carpeted in gold and brown, and the sun, though bright, offered little warmth as it tilted toward late afternoon. Earl Johnson, as always, sat on his usual bench coat, zipped up to his chin, hands buried in his pockets, Hunter resting quietly at his side. It should have been another peaceful day, filled with the distant sound of Lucy's violin and the gentle thud of a ball from children playing nearby. But trouble, as it so often does, arrived quietly and grew louder with every step. Earlier that morning, a young mother named Karen Adams Petite, with honey blonde hair pulled tight into a bun and a tired grace to her movements, had been walking her 5-year-old daughter Mia through the park. Karen was a single parent, her patience stretched thin by work and worry, but her warmth shone through in the way she knelt to tie Mia's shoes or lifted her daughter to point at squirrels in the trees. Mia, a child of boundless energy and a mop of dark curls, danced around her mother's legs, clutching a small pink purse decorated with cartoon animals. As they left the park, Karen realized her own wallet was missing, an old brown leather one, worn at the corners, and containing not just cash but her driver's license and several cherished family photos. Panic turned quickly into speculation. By midday, the rumor mill had begun to churn at Sam's Corner Cafe. Marjorie Bennett, never one to waste an opportunity to stoke drama, declared that she'd seen that old man Earl sitting right where the wallet must have been lost. Her friend Dolores, a robust woman in her 60s with a fondness for colorful scarves and an ever-present cane, nodded solemnly. Dolores, sharp-eyed but not unkind, was known for her honesty, but also for her wariness of newcomers. "And that big dog," she added, "you never know with animals. Makes some people nervous." Their conversation, overheard by Sam Wilson as he refilled the sugar jar, made him frown. Sam knew Earl's quiet routine and felt a twinge of discomfort at the rapid spiral of suspicion. By mid-afternoon, the news had reached the sheriff's office. Sheriff Travis Miller, broad-shouldered and unsmiling in his pressed uniform, listened with mounting concern. For all his dedication to the law, Travis was not immune to the quiet prejudices that can build in small towns, especially when reinforced by voices he had grown up trusting. He called for Deputy Mark Evans to join him, a lanky, fair-haired man in his 30s with sharp features and a quiet manner. Mark, loyal and by the book, was new to Brooksville, having moved from the Midwest after a messy divorce that left him wary but eager to prove himself in a fresh community. Together, Travis and Mark set off for Maple Grove, their patrol car rolling to a stop by the park's iron gate. As they walked down the main path, their presence drew the attention of the few scattered park-goers. Mrs. Gallagher paused mid-knitting, and 2 teenage boys tossing a football lowered their voices and watched with interest. Lucy, who had arrived earlier to practice, sat on the edge of the gazebo's steps, violin case at her side, unaware at first of the storm building just yards away. Earl looked up as the sheriff and his deputy approached. The sight of Travis, tall and imposing in his dark uniform, brought an old ache to Earl's chest, a memory of encounters where explanation was never enough. Hunter sensed the change instantly, ears flattening and posture alert, but not aggressive. His eyes locked on the newcomers. Travis's face was carefully blank. "Afternoon, Mr. Johnson," he said, his tone formal but tight. "We've had a report of a missing wallet. Some folks saw you in this area earlier." Earl's hands, broad and steady, rested on the bench beside him. "I've been here most of the day, Sheriff. Haven't seen a wallet." His words were calm, deliberate, but Lucy could hear the tension behind them from across the green. Mark Evans stepped forward, hands on his belt, his expression wary but not hostile. "Mind if we take a look around, sir? It'll only take a minute." Hunter shifted, placing himself between Earl and the two officers, body taut but silent. The dog's stance was protective, head held high, not a hint of aggression in his gaze. Lucy, watching now with growing alarm, stood up and hurried toward the group, her sneakers crunching through the leaves. "Dad, what's going on?" she called, her voice carrying. Travis turned to his daughter, irritation flickering across his face. "Stay back, Lucy. This is official business." Lucy, unwilling to be dismissed, came closer anyway, her eyes darting between Earl Hunter and her father. Mr. Johnson wouldn't take anything. He's always here. Everyone knows that. Mark knelt to scan the grass near the bench, glancing up at Lucy with a look of awkward sympathy. "We just have to check, miss." The moment stretch charged with an uneasy silence. Earl's shoulders tightened, but he nodded his assent. "Go ahead." Travis and Mark began searching the area, methodically parting leaves with their shoes peering under the bench. Hunter never moved more than a step from Earl's eyes, never leaving the officers. Sam Wilson, who had seen the patrol car arrive, strolled over from the cafe, wiping his hands on his apron. He was stockier than most, but moved with surprising agility. "Is there a problem, Sheriff?" he asked, tone light but eyes sharp. Travis straightened. "Just following up on a lost wallet, Sam." "Routine check." Sam nodded, offered Earl a reassuring smile, and stood nearby. Arms folded, a subtle show of solidarity. Lucy felt the sting of her father's brusqueness, a familiar battle between her ideals and his rules. "Dad, this isn't fair," she insisted. "You're only doing this because people keep talking." Travis shot her a warning look, jaw set. "Enough, Lucy. Let us do our job." Mark paused, lifting a handful of leaves to reveal nothing but a bottle cap and a scrap of paper. "Nothing here, Sheriff." Travis frowned, uncertainty clouding his features. The boys with the football edged closer, curiosity mingling with discomfort. One named Jamie, 14, wiry, with unruly hair and a chipped front tooth, murmured to his friend, "I knew it. They're hassling that old guy again." Jamie was a familiar figure in the park, always quick with a joke, but also fiercely loyal to his friends, shaped by a difficult home life that made him sensitive to injustice. Lucy stepped forward, standing between Earl and the officers, her arms crossed. "Dad, if you really want to help, you should listen to the people who know Mr. Johnson. And Hunter's the gentlest dog I've ever met." Travis, visibly struggling between his role as sheriff and his role as father, hesitated. "We have to be thorough, Lucy. People expect us to keep order." Earl met Travis's gaze, his own steady and unflinching. "I understand, Sheriff. You do what you need to do. But I hope you'll believe me when I say I'm just here for the peace and the view." The wind picked up, scattering more leaves, the chill deepening. Sam clapped Earl on the shoulder. "Let me know if you need anything, Earl. Coffee's on the house tomorrow." Hunter relaxed at the sound of Sam's voice, his stance softening as the tension ebbed. As the search concluded, Travis could find nothing to justify the suspicion. He straightened, cleared his throat, and nodded curtly to Earl. "Thank you for your patience." Lucy shot her father a look of mingled pride and exasperation. "You see," she said softly, but Travis turned away, the burden of his position heavy on his shoulders. The crowd dispersed, whispers trailing in their wake. Earl sat back down, Hunter laying his head in Earl's lap, eyes closing with a weary sigh. Lucy lingered the rift with her father aching, but she smiled at Earl and Hunter, determined to stand by them no matter how deep the shadows of doubt might fall. The wind in Brooksville carried a promise of winter, weaving through the bare limbs of the maples and rattling the empty branches like bones. The golden carpet that once covered the grass of Maple Grove Park was thinning now, and the late afternoon sun cast long blue shadows across the benches and winding paths. Lucy Miller returned to the park with her violin as usual, but today curiosity burned behind her quiet steps. The unease of yesterday's accusation lingered in the air, heavy and unresolved. Even as the townsfolk began to leave Earl and Hunter in peace, questions gnawed at Lucy. Questions about the quiet old man, and most of all, about his silent, noble companion. Hunter had always intrigued Lucy, but lately she noticed something different about him. The dog moved with a soldier's discipline, but also with a trace of melancholy, a kind of watchfulness that suggested secrets hidden beneath his graying fur. He still rested at Earl's feet, still watched the world with calm, patient eyes. But Lucy sensed there was a story in the way Hunter sometimes gazed at the horizon, as if waiting for someone who would never return. Lucy resolved to learn more. That Saturday morning, she left home early, bundled in her favorite green parka, and hid behind a cluster of hedges not far from Earl's bench. She felt a little guilty, like a detective in a children's novel, but the idea of solving the mystery around Hunter felt oddly urgent, as if she owed it to both the dog and Earl. Lucy watched as Earl and Hunter arrived. Earl's walk was slower than usual, his limp more pronounced after the cold night, but his face softened when he saw Hunter trotting beside him, tail swinging low in contentment. For a while, nothing out of the ordinary happened. Earl took his usual seat, and Hunter circled, sniffed the base of the maple, and lay down his head, resting on his crossed paws. The park was empty except for Mrs. Gallagher, who shuffled past in her powder blue coat, carrying a tote bag full of library books, and Ben, the curious young boy from before, who peered at Hunter from behind a nearby tree, hoping for a glance or a wag of the tail. As Lucy watched, Hunter rose suddenly and shook himself, sending a few stray leaves spinning. He padded toward the old bench where Earl always placed his worn satchel. As Hunter moved, Lucy spotted something glinting under his thick collar, a faded strip of leather almost hidden by the dog's ruff. On impulse, she crept closer, heart hammering. Hunter paused, turning his head toward Lucy, with a calm, level gaze that made her hesitate. But after a moment, the dog sat regal and accepting, allowing Lucy to approach. She knelt, reaching out tentatively. "Hey, boy, mind if I take a look?" Hunter's ears flicked, but he stayed perfectly still. Lucy gently lifted the collar. The leather was old, darkened by years of wear, and attached to it was a battered metal tag. Squinting, Lucy made out the faint etching, Sergeant William H. Carter, U.S. Army. Beneath that, a series of numbers, the dog's military ID. Lucy's breath caught. Carter. She remembered the name from an old photo Earl kept tucked in his jacket. Two young men in uniform, smiling in a distant country. One of them clearly a younger Earl. The other, she realized, must be William Carter. Hunter, sensing Lucy's realization, nuzzled her hand gently as if in agreement. She stroked the dog's head, awe and sadness mingling. Hunter had belonged to a fallen soldier, one who had fought, and Lucy guessed died far from home. It explained the dog's loyalty, his pain, and why he had bonded so deeply with Earl. Shaken, Lucy left the park, the story burning in her chest. She hurried down Main Street past the holiday decorations that now gleamed in shop windows toward Sam's Corner Cafe. Inside, Sam Wilson stood behind the counter, his broad frame hunched over a steaming pot of coffee. The cafe was warm and crowded, filled with the scent of cinnamon and the gentle buzz of morning conversation. Sam greeted Lucy with his usual booming voice, "Morning, kiddo." "Hot chocolate today." He wore a flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms dusted with flour. His hair was even wilder than usual, escaping in tufts beneath his battered baseball cap. His eyes were kind, set deep in a face weathered by kindness and hard work. Lucy nodded distractedly, setting her violin case on a stool. "Sam, can I ask you something about Mr. Johnson?" "And about Hunter?" Sam's eyebrows lifted with surprise. He poured a mug and slid it across the counter. "You've got questions, huh? Always figured you would." He wiped his hands on a dish towel and leaned in, voice lowering. "What's on your mind?" Lucy explained what she had seen, the name on the collar, the link to the soldier in Earl's photograph. Sam listened intently, his usual cheer replaced by a thoughtful gravity. "Bill Carter," he said softly. "Yeah, I remember him. Came through town a few times, when you were just a little girl. He and Earl served together, overseas, Afghanistan, I think. Bill never made it home for good. Lost in action. It broke Earl up bad. Hunter was Carter's partner, best dog in the whole division, they said." Lucy's eyes widened. "So Hunter and Earl, they both lost someone." Sam nodded, his expression tender. "Guess that's why they understand each other so well. Two soldiers left behind by the same war, holding on to the same ghost." He leaned closer, dropping his voice even further. "Not everyone in this town cares to remember, but I do. Earl saved my cousin once back when I was just out of the Navy. He's good people, and that dog, he's more loyal than most folks I know." Lucy sat for a moment, letting the story settle. The truth reshaped her understanding not just of Earl and Hunter, but of the silent wounds that lingered in her own family. She thought of her father's rigidness, of the way loss makes some people hard and others gentle. "Thanks, Sam," she said at last, her voice thick with emotion. "I needed to know." Sam reached across the counter, squeezing her hand. "Sometimes the only way through grief is to share it. Earl doesn't talk about it much, but I bet he'd tell you if you ask the right way." When Lucy returned to the park that afternoon, the sky was streaked with lavender and rose. Earl was still there, the cold drawing color into his cheeks, Hunter pressed against his side for warmth. Lucy approached with new respect and understanding. She knelt, wrapping her arms around Hunter's neck, whispering, "You're a hero, you know." Earl watched her surprise flickering across his features, and for the first time, Lucy saw the beginnings of trust and gratitude in his tired eyes. As darkness fell, the three of them sat together beneath the maple's sheltering limbs. A young girl, an old soldier, and a loyal dog, bound by sorrow, courage, and a secret that was now finally shared. The skies above Brooksville darkened with the strange, urgent energy that always precedes a true autumn storm. By early afternoon, clouds thick slate gray and restless pressed low against the town's rooftops. The wind rattled the windows of Sam's Corner Cafe, sent leaves spinning in frantic spirals across Maple Grove Park, and made the last of the season's gold cling stubbornly to the branches. Lucy Miller, in her blue sweater and rain boots, walked briskly toward the park violin case bumping gently against her leg. She had planned only a short practice session. The clouds promised rain, but the music that lived in her chest felt brighter than any coming storm. As Lucy entered the park, she spotted Earl Johnson and Hunter beneath the ancient maple, as reliable as ever. Earl was bundled in his thick coat, a red wool scarf looped around his neck, his posture a little more hunched than usual from the cold. His cheeks were wind-chapped, but his eyes sparkled when he noticed Lucy approaching. Hunter rose to greet her, giving a single deep woof and a happy wag of his tail, his powerful frame seeming to slice through the growing gloom. The dog's coat was damp along his haunches, dusted with leaves from a morning spent patrolling the park. Lucy greeted them both with a grin, relieved by the comfort of their presence. They spoke little at first, letting the hush of the coming rain fill the silence between them. Lucy unpacked her violin and began to play a gentle melody, one she had written herself, inspired by the stories Earl had shared of distant deserts and the brave dogs who guarded him and his friends. The music drifted over the park, drawing a few onlookers, including Mrs. Gallagher, who paused on her walk umbrella in hand, her round glasses fogging slightly in the chill. She was joined by Ben, the little boy with freckles and endless curiosity, who peered from beneath the brim of a rain hat almost too big for his head. As Lucy played, Hunter lay close at her feet, eyes half closed in contentment, while Earl listened with his gaze fixed on the far side of the park where the trees bent in the wind. Soon Sam Wilson appeared, ducking out from his cafe, an enormous yellow slicker covering his broad shoulders. He called out storms coming, fast you three. His voice was cheerful, but his eyes held concern. Better finish up and head home soon. Lucy nodded, but finished her song, determined to play until the very first drops fell. The first rumble of thunder startled the birds from their roosts. Lucy's last note hung in the air, trembling like the leaves above her. She packed up quickly, stuffing her violin in its case as the wind rose to a howl. Earl helped her, his gloved hands steady despite the cold, while Hunter circled them both, uneasy but loyal. "Let's go," Lucy Earl said gently. "That's not a storm you want to be out in." But Lucy hesitated, eyes drawn to the swirling clouds and the quicksilver gleam of lightning flickering on the horizon. She glanced back toward the far end of the park, where she had left her sheet music clipped to a bench near the gazebo. "I have to get my music," she shouted over the rising wind. Before Earl could stop her, Lucy dashed across the grass boots, splashing through muddy puddles. Earl cursed softly, shaking his head, and followed as fast as his aching knees would allow. Hunter, sensing the urgency, took off at a run, his powerful legs eating up the distance between Lucy and the shelter of the gazebo. The rain broke with a sudden fierce violence, sheets of water lashing the park, blurring the world into a swirl of gray. Lucy's hands shook as she unclipped the music from the bench, the wind tearing at the pages. Lucy Earl called, voice hoarse, "Get under the gazebo!" Hunter was already there, barking sharply, urging her towards safety. Lucy sprinted for cover, nearly slipping on the slick grass, but Hunter reached her first, pressing his body against her legs, steadying her. Earl staggered in just moments later, breathless and wet, through hair plastered to his head beneath his cap. Under the gazebo's wooden roof, the three huddled together as the storm raged. Lucy clutched her violin, trembling from cold and adrenaline. Hunter stood alert, his body a wall between Lucy and the wind, while Earl placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You all right?" Earl asked, voice low. Lucy nodded, swallowing hard. "Thank you. I didn't mean to scare you." Hunter nudged her gently as if to say, "No harm done." Outside, lightning crackled across the sky, thunder shaking the wooden beams. The park was empty, but for a few shapes, Mrs. Gallagher under her umbrella running for cover. Ben scooped up by his mother, dashing toward the street. Even Sam Wilson could be seen in the distance, waving frantically, rain streaming from his hood. In the chaos, Sheriff Travis Miller arrived, his patrol car gliding to a stop near the main path. Tall and stern as ever, Travis stepped out in a black raincoat, eyes scanning the park in worry. He spotted the trio under the gazebo and ran through the downpour, face drawn with concern. "Lucy," Travis called, voice rough. Relief flooded his face when he saw she was safe, but his tone sharpened as he reached the shelter. "You can't just run off in a storm like this. You could have been hurt." Lucy, still shaken, met her father's gaze with defiance and gratitude all at once. "I'm fine, Dad. Hunter and Earl were with me." Travis looked at Earl, then at Hunter, the rigid lines of his face softening. "Thank you," he said, quiet but sincere. As the rain hammered the roof, the five of them, Lucy, Earl, Hunter, Travis, and Sam, who had joined them breathless from his dash across the grass, shared an uneasy camaraderie. Sam clapped Travis on the back, grinning. "You owe these two more than you know, Sheriff. They look out for all of us." Travis nodded slowly, the weight of his doubts pressing against the lessons of the day. He looked at Earl, meeting his eyes with respect. "Seems I do." He admitted, voice carrying over the storm. When the rain finally eased, a rainbow arched over the park, the world glittering and new. The townspeople watching from their windows would remember the sight. A girl, her father, an old soldier, and a faithful dog huddled together in the aftermath, changed by courage and kindness. From that day, Earl and Hunter were no longer just fixtures beneath the maple. They were heroes in the eyes of Sam, Mrs. Gallagher, Ben, and even quietly in the mind of Sheriff Travis Miller, who found himself questioning the barriers he'd so carefully built. Sunshine returned to Brooksville in the wake of the storm, as if the sky itself wished to make amends for its previous rage. The air was washed clean and fresh, sparkling on every branch of the maples and making the park seem, for a few hours at least, young again. Maple Grove bustled with new energy, neighbors sweeping their porches, children chasing after puddles, and dogs shaking the rain from their coats. The scars of the tempest had faded, but for Lucy Miller, something inside her felt changed and restless, as if the storm had rearranged the furniture of her heart. Word of Earl Johnson and Hunter's courage during the storm had traveled fast. That morning, Sam Wilson greeted Lucy at the door of the cafe, an approving grin creasing his bearded face. Sam wore a faded navy sweatshirt, the logo cracked but proud, and his hands were dusted with flour as he rolled out biscuit dough. "You know, not every day this town gets a story like that," he said, nodding toward the park visible through the window. "Folks are talking, and most of them sound a whole lot kinder than they did last week." Lucy felt a glow of pride, but also anxiety, a sense that something important still needed to be done, a truth still waiting in the shadows. Lucy and Sam sat at a corner table with steaming mugs of cocoa. She shared what she had discovered about Hunter's collar, the name Sergeant William Carter, and the photograph she had glimpsed in Earl's jacket. Sam listened quietly, his blue eyes focused and thoughtful. "I remember Carter," he said finally, his voice low. "He was a good man. Always had a joke, even when things were rough. And Earl, he was more than just a soldier. There are people alive today because he kept his head when everyone else lost theirs." Lucy felt her chest tighten with a bittersweet admiration. Why doesn't he tell anyone, she wondered aloud. Why let people think the worst? Sam shrugged, wiping his hands on a towel. "Sometimes it's easier to live with ghosts than to fight old battles again, especially when you're not sure anyone will listen." Lucy thought of her father, of how hard it was for him to share anything that hurt, and nodded. She knew what she needed to do. That afternoon, Lucy made her way to the park, the grass still soft underfoot. She found Earl and Hunter beneath their maple, both enjoying the brief warmth. Earl was whittling a small piece of wood, the curls of shavings piling at his feet. Hunter lay beside him, head on his paws, his eyes alert as ever. Lucy approached her violin case slung across her back, determination in her step. "Mr. Johnson!" She began, voice gentle. "I was wondering if you might tell me about Sergeant Carter and about Hunter." Earl paused, his hands going still. For a moment, Lucy feared she had asked too much. But then Earl nodded, setting down the carving. His gaze went far away to a place before broken bones and lonely afternoons. "Bill Carter and I met overseas. He was a good friend, a brother, really. That dog there was his, but we all depended on him. Hunter could sniff out danger where none of us could see it. He saved our lives more than once." "Bill?" Earl swallowed, pain flickering in his eyes. "Bill didn't make it back, but Hunter did. And when they sent the dog home, nobody knew what to do with him. I took him in. Maybe I needed him as much as he needed me." He smiled at Hunter, who looked up and gave a soft, questioning whine. "Guess we kept each other going." As Lucy listened, her heart swelled with empathy. "You're a hero, Mr. Johnson," she said. "People need to know that." Earl shook his head with a quiet, rueful chuckle. "I'm just an old man trying to mind his business. Heroes are the ones who don't come home." Before Lucy could reply, footsteps sounded behind them. Sheriff Travis Miller appeared, hat in hand, looking more tentative than usual. He was accompanied by Deputy Mark Evans, whose habitual reserve seemed softened by the events of the past few days. Travis's face, usually stern, was drawn with uncertainty. He cleared his throat. "Lucy said I should come talk to you, Earl. She's been telling stories I'd like to hear for myself." Lucy flashed her father a quick, encouraging smile. Earl gestured for the men to join him on the bench. As they sat, Earl told his story again, of Afghanistan, of Carter of nights spent waiting for the dawn. He spoke with the spare clarity of someone who had recited the truth only to himself, never out loud. Mark Evans, sitting with his hands clasped tight, nodded in understanding. He too was a veteran, though he'd never spoken of it openly in town. When Earl finished, Travis was silent for a long moment. His eyes, a cold blue that usually missed nothing, seemed suddenly uncertain. "Bill Carter saved my life," he said softly. "I never forgot his dog, didn't know what happened after." He looked at Earl with newfound respect, a hint of regret in his posture. "I owe you more than an apology. I owe you the truth. I let old habits and old voices color how I treated you. I was wrong." Earl looked at him, his own face gentle. "We all do what we know, Sheriff. Sometimes we just need a little help seeing past it." Word spread quickly. That evening, Sam posted a note on the cafe's community board telling the story of Earl and Hunter, of courage and loyalty, of loss and new beginnings. Mrs. Gallagher, who had always reserved judgment, began to speak up on Earl's behalf during her afternoon walks. Even Marjorie Bennett, the sharp-tongued widow, was overheard telling Dolores that perhaps the old soldier and his dog deserved a little gratitude. As dusk fell, Lucy played her violin beneath the maple for Earl and Hunter, her music swelling with hope and reconciliation. Townsfolk passing by paused to listen, some tipping their hats, others simply standing quietly, the park gentler than it had ever been. For the first time since he'd come to Brooksville, Earl felt the tightness in his chest loosen. He watched Lucy, her father, Mark, Sam, and even the once skeptical faces in the crowd, and allowed himself to believe in belonging again. Hunter, sensing the peace, rolled onto his back with a rare playful bark, and Earl laughed, a deep surprised sound that seemed to lighten the entire evening. The dawn of the long-awaited day arrived with the promise of rare warmth for late autumn. Maple Grove Park glistened in the morning sun, the grass silvered with dew, and a few tenacious red leaves clinging to the maples like small defiant flames. Lucy Miller woke early nerves humming in her fingertips as she moved around her room, carefully laying out her favorite dress, a simple navy blue, soft at the edges from years of wear. She tied her hair with a ribbon, the same color as the late afternoon sky, and pressed her violin case to her heart. Today was not a day for routine. Today was a day for courage and gratitude. Word of the concert had swept through Brooksville like sunlight breaking the clouds. Lucy, with the quiet help of Sam Wilson, had spread the invitation to every corner of the town. At the cafe, Sam taped handwritten flyers to the windows, his cheerful baritone telling each customer, "We're honoring two of our bravest. Be there, or you'll regret it." Sam had even convinced Ben's mother to bake a tray of chocolate chip cookies and Mrs. Gallagher to bring her signature apple cider. For once, even Marjorie Bennett did not grumble. Instead, she lent a thermos and her best tartan picnic blanket for guests. Earl Johnson sat beneath the maple, his familiar silhouette softened by anticipation. He wore a clean shirt, white with a faint blue striped sleeves rolled carefully to his elbows, paired with pressed trousers and his old army boots. There was a subtle pride in his posture that morning, an ease that had taken root only since the storm and its aftermath. Hunter, recently brushed to a glossy shine, lay at Earl's feet, his great tail thumping softly whenever anyone passed by. There was something almost regal about the dog that day, as if he sensed that for once he was not a shadow, but the star of the town's gaze. As the crowd began to gather, Lucy's heart fluttered. Ben, in his green jacket and sneakers, was the first child to arrive, dragging his mother behind him. Sam stood at the edge of the growing assembly, his cafe apron traded for a navy peacoat. He arranged cups and plates, greeting every new arrival with the easy warmth that had made his cafe the soul of the community. Mrs. Gallagher, small but mighty, oversaw the refreshments, setting up the cider and treats with military precision. Even Dolores, with her bright scarf and cane, was there, eyes shining with anticipation. Among the crowd stood Sarah Carter, a visitor to Brooksville with ties to its past. Sarah, tall and slender, with thoughtful green eyes and a kind, bookish air, wore a gray wool coat and a soft smile. She was Bill Carter's younger sister, drawn by Sam's invitation and the whispers that her brother's memory would be honored today. The loss of her brother had marked Sarah with a gentle gravity, yet she radiated calm and grace. She approached Earl with tentative respect, introducing herself quietly. Earl rose, his handshake steady and heartfelt, and Hunter pressed against Sarah's legs as if recognizing some long-lost scent of family. "Thank you for remembering him," Sarah said softly, her voice wavering but strong, "and for looking after his dog." Sheriff Travis Miller arrived last, not in uniform, but in an old flannel shirt and khakis, his shoulders less square than usual, his eyes more open. He walked with Lucy to the front of the gathering, pausing to ruffle Ben's hair and shake Sam's hand. For the first time in memory, the townspeople watched the sheriff not as a distant authority, but as a father and neighbor. Lucy took a deep breath, stepping to the center of the crowd. Her voice, when it came, was soft but steady. "Thank you everyone for coming. Today we're here to honor two heroes, Earl Johnson and Hunter, whose courage, kindness, and loyalty have changed this town for the better." She lifted her violin and began to play the notes, rising sweet and clear into the blue sky. The melody was her own, a song she had written to capture the heartache, hope, and healing that had unfolded over the last weeks. As Lucy played, Earl felt tears prick at his eyes, not of sadness, but of release. Hunter sat proudly by his side, chest lifted, eyes soft. The townspeople, too, were moved. Even Marjorie Bennett dabbed at her eyes with a corner of her napkin. Ben, usually restless, was still hands clasped together, gaze fixed on the music and the dog. When the final note faded, Sam stepped forward to say a few words, his voice rich with gratitude. Mrs. Gallagher presented Earl with a small bouquet of autumn flowers, while Ben shyly offered Hunter a homemade dog treat shaped like a bone. Laughter and applause rolled through the park like a gentle tide. It was then that Sheriff Travis approached Earl, pausing to look out at the faces of his friends and neighbors. His voice trembled as he spoke. "Earl, I owe you more than words can say. I misjudged you, let the past cloud my vision. I'm sorry for my doubts, for my actions, for not seeing the hero in front of me. This town is lucky to have you and Hunter." He extended his hand and Earl accepted it, their grip firm and true. Hunter pressed between them, tail wagging as if sealing the truce himself. Lucy watched the scene with a fullness in her heart she had never known. She slipped her arm around her father's waist, and he hugged her close, pride and apology mingling in his eyes. Their rift, once wide and aching, seemed to narrow in that moment, replaced by mutual understanding. As the sun lowered, the celebration lingered. People swapped stories and memories. Mrs. Gallagher poured cider, and Sam told jokes until Sarah Carter laughed for the first time in ages. Even Marjorie, unbending, handed Hunter a piece of cookie and declared, "Every hero deserves a treat." The shadows grew long, but no one rushed to leave. At last, as twilight fell, Earl stood and addressed the gathering. "I'm grateful," he said simply, "for your kindness and your trust. This place is starting to feel like home." Sarah squeezed his hand. Lucy, smiling through tears, played one last gentle song. The park glowed with lanterns and laughter. A community once divided now stood united, wounds not erased, but mending. Beneath the maple's sprawling limbs, the hearts of Brooksville beat together stronger for the trials they had faced. The first rays of winter sun spilled over Brooksville, casting a gentle gold on frost-tipped grass and lending the sleepy town an air of hope and renewal. Maple Grove Park shimmered with morning light, the great maple once a silent witness to loneliness and suspicion, now standing proud at the heart of a transformed community. A brisk but friendly wind set the last few leaves dancing, and the world for a moment felt wide open. Earl Johnson stood by the old tree shoulders, square eyes clear and open, wearing a wool cardigan over a clean blue shirt. His hands, once clenched against invisible hurts, now rested easily by his sides. There was a lightness in his step, as he greeted neighbors, no longer a stranger on the outskirts, but a man welcomed by name. Children once shy now called out, "Good morning, Mr. Johnson," and waved as they sped past on their bikes or skidded across the frost in boots. Hunter, his thick fur shining in the sunlight, pranced beside Earl with the unmistakable swagger of a dog who had found his place in the world. No longer wary, Hunter accepted pets from every small hand, ears flicking in pleasure, tail wagging like a flag of victory. He wore a new collar, now a sturdy brown leather band with a polished brass tag, inscribed Hunter, Brooksville's hero. The townspeople had voted for the title at the end of the concert, the motion seconded by Ben, who had insisted on adding four-legged to the plaque, a detail that made Earl laugh every time he remembered it. This morning, the whole town gathered at Maple Grove, drawn by the promise of a celebration unlike any other. Sam Wilson manned a steaming urn of hot chocolate near a picnic table covered in homemade pastries and pies. Sam's face was ruddy with cold, his laughter booming as he teased Mrs. Gallagher about the size of her apple cake. Mrs. Gallagher, cheeks rosy, wore her favorite tartan scarf and dispensed cider and gentle gossip in equal measure. Ben darted between the tables, distributing hand-drawn hero of the park ribbons to every dog in attendance, pausing often to pet Hunter, who accepted each new honor with patient dignity. Lucy Miller, her hair tumbling loose for the first time all autumn, moved through the crowd with her violin case. She wore a deep green dress and thick woolen stockings, her smile as bright as the winter sky. Since the concert, Lucy had found her confidence blooming. She greeted neighbors with an easy grace and paused to speak with everyone, especially those who used to look past her father or Earl without a word. Sheriff Travis Miller mingled easily for, perhaps the first time, his posture-relaxed eyes, kind the weight of old mistakes softened by forgiveness and new beginnings. He wore a simple coat and jeans, no badge, just the father of Lucy, the neighbor of Earl, the friend of Sam. Now and then he glanced toward his daughter with quiet pride, grateful for her courage and compassion. A special guest joined the crowd, Mayor Joanne Bailey, a tall, silver-haired woman with a commanding presence and twinkling hazel eyes. She wore a tailored navy coat, boots shined to a mirror gleam, and a welcoming smile that had helped her lead Brooksville for over a decade. Mayor Bailey's voice when she addressed the crowd was clear and warm. We gather today not just to honor a man and his dog, but to remind ourselves that home is built from acceptance, courage, and the small kindnesses that change everything. She nodded to the work crew beside her, who hoisted a bronze plaque into the morning light and fixed it to the roots of the great maple. The plaque read, "To all those who have ever felt lost, may this be a place of peace, courage, and belonging. Home to everyone." As the applause died down, Sarah Carter, Bill Carter's sister, who had decided to settle in Brooksville after the concert, joined Earl and Lucy by the plaque. Sarah wore a bright blue scarf and carried a basket of winter flowers. She had found healing too in the park, in the music, and in the stories shared over cider and warm pastries. She knelt beside Hunter, tying a white ribbon around his collar, whispering, "Thank you, friend, for watching over my brother and for giving this town hope." Lucy tucked her violin under her chin and began to play her music, threading through the laughter and stories of the townsfolk. The melody was simple, a tune of welcome stitched with joy and the hush of forgiveness. Earl, grinning, clapped along, and even Hunter gave a cheerful bark, earning a laugh from the children. After the music, as people lingered over sweets and stories, Ben's mother, Megan, joined the group. Megan, a tall woman with chestnut hair pulled back in a loose braid, had grown up in Brooksville and weathered her own share of hardship. With gentle eyes and a ready smile, she had always tried to teach Ben that kindness matters more than fear. Today she clasped Earl's hand and thanked him quietly, but with tears in her eyes for giving her son a new kind of hero to admire. When most of the crowd had drifted home, the sun now well above the rooftops, Earl and Lucy found themselves alone beneath the maple. Hunter sprawled at their feet, content and sleepy, his tongue lolling from the side of his mouth. Earl watched the light shift through the branches, the plaque gleaming in the sun. He felt a peace deeper than any he'd known since war, deeper even than he'd thought possible. Lucy set her violin aside and tossed a stick for Hunter, who leapt up tail a banner of joy. She and Earl laughed as Hunter bounded after it, scattering a flock of sparrows who rose in a flurry of wings. Earl turned to Lucy, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Never thought I'd see the day, kid," he said softly. "Guess even an old soldier and a tired dog can find a home, if they're lucky enough to meet the right friends." Lucy slipped her hand into his, a simple gesture of understanding and gratitude. The laughter of children echoed through the park, mixing with the distant strains of her music, and the joyful barking of Hunter. Under the maple's wide arms, their smiles carried across the green sunlight, glinting in every eye. Brooksville, for the first time in a long while, felt whole, a place where no one was truly a stranger, and every lost soul could find their way home. True belonging begins when we open our hearts to those who are different and choose kindness over judgment. In everyday life, it only takes a simple act of understanding to change someone's world and maybe even your own. If this story touched you, please share it with your friends, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories. What is one moment when someone's kindness changed your life? Let us know below.